Good morning. Happy Monday, everybody. And happy Mother's Day to all of the moms out there. Today I'm drinking the cacao drink again. And today's episode is kind of a tender one. It's gonna be the first time that I'm really laying out like the general shape of my faith journey. I feel like on Friday, episode 3, I did kind of a bad job at sticking to my word. You know, I said I wasn't really going to go into how I left Mormonism, and then I went like straight into how and why I left Mormonism. So I'm going to try very hard to stick to what I said. I want this to be something that anybody can watch just to understand me better and not anything to do with the church. So I'm not here to argue or convince, just kind of share what the path has looked like for me and how it's changed the way I see the world, myself, and like what it means to belong. Good morning, Leah. I also feel like I might have lost myself a little bit in episode 3. I think I was feeling pretty anxious and like feeling like I needed to perform and entertain instead of just coming on here and being myself, being authentic, and being honest. I actually called my mom yesterday to wish her happy Mother's Day, and she gave me some advice, some suggestions. So just want to quickly reiterate, this is just kind of my story. It might not be 100% factually accurate. In episode 3, I think I said something about Myra's hands like melting off from the chemicals. Apparently it was because she had OCD and washed her hands too much. I still feel like maybe the bleach wasn't great for her hands, but that was my, I guess, perspective on the story. So, yeah, again, just reiterating, this is just my story. It's based off of my true experiences, and I'm doing my best to say it accurately. But all this stuff happened a long time ago in a land far, far away. I was 12 years old, and certain things stood out to me more than other things. And so, just if anything feels like you were there and you feel like it wasn't super accurate, sorry. I'm trying my best here. So once again, today's episode, the big picture of the faith deconstruction journey. And I'm just gonna be calm. I'm just gonna be myself. I'm not gonna be all like crazy and anxious like I was on Friday, episode 3. I just want to connect with you guys this morning. I'm gonna read an affirmation that I wrote down for myself. I speak from truth, not perfection. My voice is enough, and my story is sacred because it is mine. Let's get started. Welcome. My name is Braden. I was born and raised Mormon. I was born in American Fork, Utah, which is like the heart of Mormon land. And I don't mean to say that in any sort of, there's no connotation to that. It's great. To give a super brief introduction into Mormonism and the basic beliefs that I held, I believed that we existed before this life in something called the pre-existence, and that we came down to this earth to get a body and to experience life, and while we're here, there's a couple of things that we need to do, like get baptized and try to be disciples of Christ. All good things. I believe that Joseph Smith restored the true church, which is the idea that during like the Dark Ages and I guess the period between Christ's birth and when Joseph Smith restored the church, I guess I believed that all other forms of Christian religion had just kind of strayed from the original teachings of what Christ had said. I also believed in modern prophets, so there's this idea that there's like one person who is like a direct link to God and can provide guidance to the whole church, including myself. When I was Mormon, I believed in the Book of Mormon, which is another testament of Christ. In Mormonism, they believe that it's kind of just, it's like another witness, another testament, another point in history to help clarify some of Christ's teaching. And I believed in like the word of wisdom, eternal families, and all the extra stuff that comes with Mormonism. Like I was a thorough believer, and I loved it. I loved the confidence that Mormonism gave me in decisions that I was making. I loved that I could kind of just like say a prayer and get answers to anything that I felt like I wanted to know. At least that was the idea, what I was told. My experience was a little bit different. But it was truly like core to who I was. I would share Mormonism. I would like teach people about it. I loved talking about it. I remember actually there was one time when I was at a bar with my friends. It was like this VR bar, and I wasn't drinking. I was just kind of like playing the games with everybody. And these two girls were talking to me, and they were probably a little tipsy. I didn't realize at the time that they may have been flirting with me, but I was just kind of like, you guys want to know about Joseph Smith and like all the Mormon stuff? And I like talked to these two girls at a bar about the church, and like gave a full-blown history and like where the Book of Mormon comes from and all that good stuff. And that was sort of how I approached a lot of things. I was very deep in my belief, and it was a very core element of who I was. In fact, I converted my ex before I met her. And I want to keep this surface level, so I don't want to go like too deep. I feel like last week I was like, all right, here's the introduction, and then I dove straight into some like deep stuff. So if you want to know any more about any of those things, let me know. And I guess one question I have for the viewers is to ponder kind of like what happens when you just accept what you've been taught. Because something that I used to think about was the fact that like I just felt lucky to be Mormon, to be born into the family that I was born into, to be born in the location that I was born in, to be able to have access to the one true church and all of the doctrines that I held so dearly and I believed in. I felt lucky, but it's really just like, it was just circumstantial, you know. I was in the right place at the right time, and my family told me these things, and I just accepted it as 100% truth. And then I started to question those things that were a part of who I was from the moment I was born. So what happens when you build your life on a foundation that you didn't choose, that was kind of just handed to you? And I think I did choose it as I grew older, but it's hard to fully choose something that you've had since the beginning. I remember in Utah, I kind of just thought everybody was Mormon. I didn't even really understand that there were other religions. I was very sheltered. I think the first person I ever met that wasn't Mormon, I went to his house and I was like, this feels kind of scary. Like, it smells like cigarettes. I'm like worried that I'm gonna get tempted and led astray. And it was like other worldviews, other ways of seeing the world were very scary to me. But as I got older and more comfortable with friends who were non-LDS, and heard stories from people who were non-LDS, and I just realized that, like, you can be a good person and not be Mormon. And you can be a good person and not follow all of the kind of guidelines of Mormonism. And that happened a little bit more in high school. I think when I was probably 16. Sorry. Let me take a little drink. When I was 16, I kind of had this idea of, like, what if I thought critically about this for a second and just sort of like tried to rebuild my faith from ground up on my own, without just accepting it as complete truth, because it was what was given to me. And so I sat down and I prayed. I knelt down and I kind of pleaded with God. I was like, please tell me, or like give me some sort of reassurance that this is true. And I really struggled with prayer because part of me was like, I kind of know what the correct answer is going to be to this prayer. Like, if I'm asking God, closing my eyes, kind of like imagining what might God say in response to this question that I'm asking, it was hard for me to kind of trust the responses that I received, because I was like, how do I know this isn't just like my subconscious's best guess at what would Jesus do? What would God tell me to do? What would the prophet say I should do? And I think that's something that every LDS person has their own theories about and their own like methods for. But I remember I saw like a video of another Christian denomination of this lady who was like touched by a pastor and then like started speaking tongues, or like was like taken over by the Holy Ghost or whatever. And from my perspective as a Mormon, I'm like, that's crazy. That's not real. But if you put yourself in that person's shoes, like, they just had the most spiritual, holy experience of their life. And they fully believe that, like, that is the way that God or Jesus or, like, the Spirit is manifesting in their life. And from an outsider's perspective, even as somebody who believes in those things, I just kind of was like, yeah, you're just, you in your head believe so much that like when this pastor touches you, it's going to fill you up with the Holy Ghost and take over your whole being. And so then it happens. Like your mind is so powerful, and what you think is what you experience in so many situations. Like, there's not a ghost at the end of this hallway, but I kind of think there is, and it's freaking me out, and that feeling is real. And so that, like, the fact that I had I guess maybe the dissonance, the ability to say, like, what I believe is true, but what they believe is true is not true, even though it's a very similar experience. That was something I kind of wrestled with a lot when I was younger. So I was saying that prayer, and I was like, please, trying to not have any preconceived notions of what I was going to feel or what answer I was going to get, just like approaching God, approaching this question with a totally like blank slate. I'm not expecting any specific answer. I'm just like, hey God, what's good? And it was kind of just silent. Good morning, Myra. Welcome. And that wasn't like, I assumed at the time, I was like, oh, I might not have enough faith. I might not be, like, my testimony's probably not strong enough. Like, there's something between me and God that's preventing me from getting an answer here. But it was frustrating to like, to feel like I was approaching God in such like a humble and open and vulnerable way, and just to feel like for some reason I wasn't worthy of getting an answer. And I never did. I would say that prayer multiple times over the course of the next few years. I spent a lot of time trying to convince myself that maybe like I was the problem, or that I just didn't have enough faith, or something along those lines, right? Like I also was just constantly trying to convince myself of the truthfulness of my religion. Like, I wanted it to be true. It's a cool story. The story of Mormonism, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is like the first lesson that missionaries will teach people when they go and they're like proselyting. It's called like the plan of salvation, right? You had a life before where you lived with God, we're the literal children of God, and then you come to this earth and there's this whole experience, and Christ dies for our sins so that we can then go back to God and become like God. And that's the plan of salvation, and that's the story. And so I grew up my whole life being like, as long as I do all the right things, I go to the temple, I do baptisms for the dead, I get my endowment, and I get sealed, and kind of all these like these core things in Mormonism. I believed if I do those things, I can be like God, and I can have my own planet, and I can make Harry Potter real. Because at the time, I really loved Harry Potter, and I just wanted magic and a hippogriff and all of those cool creatures. And I thought, if I could become a god, I'm making my planet Harry Potter themed. Like, that's going to be the reality. I wanted to create my own fantastic world that was way more fun than this one, because I was bored as a child. But anyways, I wanted that story to be true. I wanted to believe that I could go and be like God. And so I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reasoning to uphold those beliefs. And like I said, I was not afraid to share them, and I thought they were so true that I shared them with the girls at a bar. I wanted people to have the truth that I believed was the truth. And the reason I'm sharing this part of the story is because I'm hoping to communicate how core this belief system was to me as a human being. this was, I would say 80% plus of my thoughts growing up had something to do, some correlation or connection to my religion, to my beliefs. It was a huge part of my personality. And even more so when we moved to the farm and we were like isolated. So much of what informed our decision to move to the farm, or my family's decision to move to the farm, was our religious beliefs. And so it was just like a very big part of my life, which is why it was so hard and disorienting and dysregulating to take that out. It was like the foundation of my existence. And I at first slowly pulled pieces away, and then eventually there was like a point where I had to kind of make a decision of like, do I still believe parts of this? Like I've been kind of slowly plucking things away. So when I was 16, I said that prayer, and then I kind of just like tried to figure stuff out as I went, and then it came time where I had to decide, like, am I going to go on a mission or not? And I was given the opportunity to do something called a church service mission, where instead of going and knocking on doors for 2 years, I made videos for the church. And it's part of how I got into video production. But it was shorter. It wasn't like as intensive. And so I didn't really get like that experience of going on a full-time proselyting mission of like just focus and study. And almost immediately after that was when I went and did the summer sales. And it was during that time that I kind of was like, I'm going to do a little bit of self-exploration. Once that church service mission ended, I like tried weed. I believe I tried alcohol around the same time. Like I was kind of trying to just like, I sort of think of it as like my Amish thing. What's that called? Where the Amish, they have when they turn 18, they can like decide to leave, but they get to have like a trial where they get to like go out and live in the real world. I say real world. They get to go live in like the modern world for a little bit and experience all this stuff that they've been kept away from, and then they get to decide like, am I coming back? So I had that my like Amish moment where I was like, I'm gonna go try the things of the world and decide if I like it or not. And it was fun, but I could understand why like we believed that it doesn't provide lasting happiness, because it's like it's this fleeting moment of like excitement when you try some of these things, but I could tell that it wasn't like super fulfilling. And that period lasted for a couple of years where I just was like trying things. And the biggest thing I felt like I learned during that period of time was that I didn't feel like I was evil. I didn't feel like I was being punished. And it kind of was like, this stuff is not really... I felt like maybe I don't need to be as afraid of this as I thought I did my entire life. Because I was like, I wouldn't go into a room with alcohol as a child. Like alcohol and substances, all these things in the word of wisdom, like were so like scary. I would hold my breath when I would walk past people smoking cigarettes. I was that person, you know? And when I started experimenting and trying other things, it was kind of like, it doesn't feel as dangerous or bad as I thought it was going to. But that didn't mean I was like, oh, none of this is true then. It was just kind of like, oh, maybe the word of wisdom is good advice, but there's no need to be like so afraid of everything. It wasn't until I think I was 20 or 21. I broke up with my ex, and I had like a moment of freedom where I kind of went off the deep end. I got some weed from a friend. I bought some alcohol for myself. I must have been 21 then, because I was able to buy it for myself. And I downloaded Tinder. I had a one night stand that also wasn't fulfilling, and I just kind of like had this moment where I was like, I feel like I'm a little bit at rock bottom, and these things that I'm trying to kind of fill the void with, or maybe like the things I'm doing to try and have fun, aren't working. So I had a moment where I was like, I'm going to delete Tinder. I'm going to go back to church. I need Jesus. So I deleted Tinder and I downloaded Mutual. And then there was like a month or two. Maybe it was like 1 month or something. And then I met Leah. And she was this like good Mormon girl. And I was like, oh, she seems happy. She seems like she's got her life together. She seems good. So I'm gonna go back. So I went to my bishop and I confessed all of my sins. Like I told him everything that I'd ever done, and it was a freaking hard conversation. I was terrified because at BYU Idaho, you have to have something called an ecclesiastical endorsement, where you have to go and talk to your bishop, and your bishop basically has to say like, yeah, you can stay in school because you're following the rules. And that's an ecclesiastical endorsement. So I was so terrified to go and repent or go through the process of repentance, because I was like, I don't want to get kicked out of school. I think it was my junior or senior year. Like I was pretty deep into my schooling, and I had this fear that if I went and I told my bishop and I confessed and did all the things that I'm supposed to do to get back to being a good and worthy Mormon, that I'll get kicked out of school. But I knew that if I wanted to have a relationship with Leah, and if I wanted to pursue a relationship with Leah, that I needed to kind of clean my act up, clean myself up, and like go through the process. Especially if we were going to get married in the temple. And my bishop, I was very lucky that my bishop was cool. He was chill. Like he listened to everything that I said, and he was like, "Oh, that's it? Okay, cool. Yeah, you're good. Don't do that anymore. Thanks for telling me." And then I was like, "Oh, that's it? Oh, cool. I feel good. I'm forgiven. Yay." And there was it did kind of feel like this weight off of my shoulders, right? It felt like I maybe had been made clean again or whole again or whatever. It felt good to finally get that off of my chest. But there was still just kind of a lot to process with Leah. So I wasn't like in the clear, but I felt good. Like I felt like I was moving in the right direction. And I slowly came like back to church. I was becoming more active in my ward. I took a calling. I was the Sunday school teacher, so I was like doing lessons every other Sunday, I think was what it was, on like core beliefs of Mormonism, and like I would try to bring my spin to things, because I felt like I had an interesting perspective from my upbringing, and like the things that my mom would teach me and my dad would teach me, and our family always had like really deep, in-depth discussions about the scriptures and the gospel whenever we would have like family home evening on Monday nights, and even though it was somewhat inconsistent, or like when we would do scripture study as a family. But I think I was still depressed. Like an underlying issue of maybe why I felt like I had this like hole I needed to fill with, whether it would be substances or sex or Christianity or religion or whatever, right? Like I felt like there was something that I needed to work on and to take care of. And I think that was just this underlying layer of depression that I had for a really long time. And I think I believed and I hoped that when I went back to church, and like when I felt like I was doing the correct or the right things, I had this idea that maybe the depression would go away, and that I'd be happy, that I'd feel fulfilled, that everything would be like, we'd be Gucci. But it didn't go away, and then I got married, and I think that the stress of planning a wedding as a 22-year-old Mormon who has no money, and like I guess all that, like I started to disassociate a little bit more. I think I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes, I don't remember exactly which one, this pattern of avoidance in my life, or escapism. So when I start to feel like stressed or overwhelmed, I tend to kind of like retreat, and it's part of the like fight, flight, or freeze response, especially for people who are in a situation where they don't feel like they have the power to fight or flee. They'll often freeze, and the idea is like you're just trying to kind of like lock down your emotions and lock down your body and like just prepare for impact. And a lot of that can be associated with disassociation, like trying to distance yourself from the experience and your body and your emotions. So I think going through the experience of like planning the wedding, getting married, and a lot of the stuff that we went through, because, and this is a key part of the story, because I didn't go on a 2-year proselyting mission and I did the church service mission, I didn't have to become what's called an elder in the church. I didn't have to get what's called the Melchizedek priesthood, which is like the next level of the priesthood. So when you're 11 or 12 years old in the church, the year that you turn 12, you become what's called a deacon if you're a male, and you get the Aaronic priesthood. And this is the reason why a 12-year-old boy in a room full of women has the authority, is because of the Aaronic priesthood. And then at 14, you become a teacher, 16, you become a priest, and then it's supposed to be like 18, you go on your mission and you become an elder, and you get the Melchizedek priesthood, which is like the priesthood of like healing and miracles, and there's like more stuff that you can do with that. Before that, you can mostly just kind of like pass the sacrament, bless the sacrament, and like do a couple of other things. I can do another episode on that at some point if people want to know more, but I don't want to get too deep. And so because of that, I didn't go through the temple when I was 18 or 19 like most young adult Mormons do, male Mormons. So when Leah and I got married, we had the opportunity to go through the temple together and do what's called the endowment, which is like where you go and you make extra covenants with God and with the church, and there's it's very sacred and therefore a little bit secretive even within the Mormon church. Like Leah and I didn't really know a whole lot of what to expect going in, and I think that the experience was a little bit different than we imagined that it was going to be. And there was one specific moment during that process, and I don't want to go too deep. If you want to know more, you can Google it. But there was one specific moment during that process where they say, do you covenant to give everything that you have to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And you're supposed to like put your hand up and just say yes. And I remember hearing that because I know that the words are very, they choose the words very carefully. And I just remember feeling like, why do I have to give everything to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And why can't I just say like, I'll give everything to God? Because that felt like a little bit better to me, I guess, to say like, I'll give everything to God. If God needs my land and my money and or anything that I have, or even my life, like I'll give that to God. But it did feel a little bit strange for me to have it be so specifically like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is like the legal entity registered with the United States government. Just felt a little bit strange to me that specific phrasing was used. And that just stood out to me. And I remember Leah and I had a conversation about that shortly after. And she was like, yeah, that is kind of strange, but whatever. It wasn't, I don't think it was as much of a big deal to her, but it stood out to me. And I think it was one of the things that started to make me look a little closer at like, what are the potential objectives or goals? Like, why is the church doing this? So that was a big moment for me. I'm going to take a quick second, take a break, get some of this drinkity drink, and read the chat, because Leah and Bailey have said some things. Leah says, also super inappropriate to make people, especially women, tell their personal matters to random untrained women. This is something that my family had issues with and continues to have issues with, even before I was Mormon, right? I mentioned a little bit about how I was exposed to adult content at a young age, which is a big deal in the Mormon church. And my parents were like, you don't really have to go tell the older white male bishop everything that you've looked at and everything that you've done sexually and like experientially or experimentally. They're like, it's not really a necessary step in the repentance process. You can just go to Jesus and Jesus will take that from you. So my family did have some kind of like woke beliefs and interpretations within the church. But yes, traditionally, the expectation is that in order for you to be forgiven for certain things, often like, I don't know, I feel like it's like the big three. It's like sex, drugs, and murder. If you do anything like that, you have to go talk to your bishop and you have to like explain in detail what you did. And then he'll tell you what you need to do in order to repent. Sometimes it's like, don't take the sacrament for a while, or there's probably more. Again, I don't really want to go too deep onto that, and I don't feel like an expert there. But yeah, it is a little bit strange to have women, young men go in and like, you're just, it's one-on-one. The door is closed for your privacy, supposedly, but you just sit there and this guy is just like, all right, what did you do? Tell me more. Is that all? Feels a little bit inappropriate. Maybe even super inappropriate. And they don't have training. They don't have any like formal training. They haven't been taught how to help people process trauma. But I guess the idea is that God's going to guide them to not make mistakes. And then Bailey says, yeah, weed and alcohol are definitely Band-Aid solutions, but they're marketed to be the thing to give you that good feeling. Exactly. I always thought it was funny that it was like drugs and alcohol is like kind of how this thing goes. It feels so much like a marketing ploy to bring alcohol into the like mix of things that feels good. Because if you actually like pay attention to how you feel when you get drunk, it's like very not a great feeling, to be honest. Like you definitely don't think about like your bigger problems, but the actual experience, like you feel dehydrated, you feel tired, you feel kind of dizzy, like the actual experience is not very fun. And I feel like it's a big marketing ploy to be like, yeah, drugs and alcohol, they're so fun and like mind expanding and opening and wow. And I think I have an interesting maybe not interesting, maybe interesting is the wrong word. My relationship with cannabis and the role I think that cannabis can play in, like, if we use it as like a tool, or the purpose of it is, my perspective on it is a little bit different, but I don't want to get too much into that. And then Leah just said, no, it was a big deal to me too. I thought it was super strange, and it was before I knew they have $450 billion and are not using it to help people like they could. Yeah, again, we're not going to get too deep into that kind of stuff today. But if you have questions about any of the things that have been said, leave a comment, and I will consider or potentially do a video where I answer all of those questions in one go or something like that. And Bailey says, so true. I think about getting drunk now since I stopped, and it makes me sick. Yeah, it's funny that it's such a common experience to like wake up the morning after drinking and be like, I'm never doing that again. And then for some reason, like, we forget that we said that, and then we do it again, and then it's like the cycle continues. Definitely an escapism and an avoidance type of behavior. All right, back to the main story. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and your questions, your engagement. And thank you, Leah, for supporting me, being here on the journey. After Friday, never mind, maybe I shouldn't say that. Moving on. As I mentioned, I kind of had a period or a phase where I allowed myself to ask questions, but it was very much on my own. It was like me doing my personal exploration, asking the personal questions that I have and having personal experiences. But it still kind of felt like I was othering myself, I guess. Like, everybody I knew was Mormon. Everybody I was close to, all of my family, all of my friends. I was going to BYU, Idaho, which is like 99.9% active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And even if you aren't, you have to still go through the ecclesiastical review and ecclesiastical endorsement to make sure that you're following the rules. So I always felt like an outsider and like I was doing something wrong. And there was nobody that I felt like I could really have conversations with about this kind of stuff. When Leah and I got married, because we went through so many of the same experiences at the exact same time with like getting our endowment together, which is not common to go through the endowment session for the first time with your future spouse. And then shortly after that, get sealed. And so we were able to sort of digest that together, as both of us having been exposed to that for the first time together. We could both be like, that was a little bit strange. Like, neither one of us had fully just been like stuffed it down or just been like, oh yeah, this is how it is. Because with so many other things in Mormonism, you're kind of just like, yep, this is how it is. And so you don't really question things. Like, you don't think things are weird. You're just so used to it. But with Leah, like, she had her own set of questions and potentially like issues or things that she disagreed with. A lot of like the misogyny of the church, the patriarchy of the church, the way that women are treated and kind of seen as like I said, if you're a 12-year-old boy and you have the Aaronic priesthood, you have the authority over any woman in the church, which is like just kind of wild. And every decision, the Relief Society is like the world's largest female organization, and every financial decision has to go through a male. Like every major decision has to go through a male, even though the Relief Society is like the largest women's organization. So there was a period of time after we got married where we tried to kind of be like woke Mormons, and we listened to like Faithful Feminist, which is this podcast that's done by some active LDS women, where they sort of talk about like the problems that they have with the church and how they are okay with it, or how they like rationalize it, maybe in a sense. It's a guide on how to do mental gymnastics if you're a feminist and Mormon. And it's a good podcast. It was really interesting, and they go through like church resources, and they share some things that maybe not every active LDS person knows. And so that kind of exposed me to some things I wasn't fully aware of, such as the kind of like the background story behind polygamy, which was another thing that kind of stood out to me as something that I was like, whoa, I wasn't aware of that. So it was like the will you give everything to the church thing, and then like the background story behind polygamy, and then I kept just kind of like learning these things that I was like, oh, I feel like I was misrepresented, or maybe misled, or even potentially lied to, whether outright or by omission, about certain things in my church. And that kind of like slowly started to open this divide of, I felt like I couldn't trust everything the way that I used to, because growing up it was like, if the prophet says it, or if somebody says it, like it's just like I take it at 100% face value as absolute truth, and there's no reason or need to kind of like critically think about that or analyze it myself. But again, still at this time, I was trying to adapt my beliefs to things, and trying to kind of be like, this is a church that's led by men, they're not perfect, all of the kind of stuff that we do to almost make excuses for the church, so that we don't have to confront our beliefs. Because again, like the core of Mormonism is that story, the before, the pre-existence, the current life, and what happens when we die, and like you can become like God. And that story is so foundational to the belief system that it's like people don't want to give that up because some guy said something racist or sexist or whatever, right? And so there's this sort of difference between doctrine and beliefs, and like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Mormons, and that's kind of why I tried to use those phrases intentionally. It's because it's one of the things that I used to sort of explain things and allow myself to put all this stuff in one side and just be like, I'm not going to think about that. There's a church that's run by men, they're flawed, nothing's perfect, and like, but all of this is still true, right? Like every red flag goes in this corner as being like just a problem with the earth and man and reality, and then everything else goes in this corner as absolutely true, unquestioned. So I was still trying to adapt my beliefs, even though I was like learning things that I was like, I don't love that. I was still trying to kind of like make it fit with my modern values, my new values, like as I was finding issues with sort of like bigger things, slowly I started to realize like I can't kind of like morph this into something that it isn't. Like I almost no longer believe in Mormonism. I believe in kind of like Bradenism, like my interpretation of Mormonism. And it's also really hard because it's like in Mormonism that we believe that like we have the truth from God, and like the truth should be unchanging. It shouldn't need to be adapted or evolved. Like it should just kind of be. And so to a point, like you can't just continue to adapt things and morph it into whatever you want it to be. And I think I reached a point where I was like, I think I need to do a little bit of research from non-church resources, which is sort of a huge no-no. We're pretty consistently told, like, do all of your research using church-approved research, like resources, things directly from the church, which comes with its own set of issues, right? Every source that isn't us is wrong is a little bit, you can see the issues with that without me having to explain it. And I had read, there's this thing in Mormonism, in the Mormon culture, called the CES letter. And I had read a little bit of it when I was 16 or 17, or like in that age range when I was having those questions. And the first time I opened it and like read through it a little bit, I was just like, this makes me uncomfortable. There's too many things in here that like, this is clearly evil and like all of that stuff. But really it was just that discomfort of having your beliefs challenged. It hurts. It's painful. It's super uncomfortable. And obviously it's going to feel not great when that story that you are so attached to is challenged. So I read a little bit of it before, and then I like put it away and was like, I'm never thinking about that again. After being married for a little while and like having these questions and continuing to try and kind of morph and just like make it work, I had like some thoughts and some memories regarding the CES letter, and I was like, I kind of want to read it again and just like see how I approach things now that I've gone to college, and I feel like I have some more critical thinking skills and analysis skills, and like I considering I studied communications, like I feel like I was like, maybe I can handle this a little bit better. But it wasn't like a desire to leave or anything. It was more of like, I want to just understand, because I remember a lot of what the CES letter was talking about was, it's pretty much just a list of questions that this guy had, and he sent it to the director of the church education system, which is what CES stands for, church education system. And he somehow had a connection, and he wrote a letter and he sent it to this guy, and it was basically just like, hey, I have some questions. I'm not trying to like disbelieve, but like I would just like some clarity or something on these. And I think I felt like maybe I could find an explanation for everything, and I went into it like, I'm gonna try to just understand the church history a little bit better and like look at some of the things I've been afraid to look at. And as I was reading it, I was kind of just like shocked by how factual it was, and like a lot of it is, I think almost all of it is from church sources. Like it'll be like, hey, in like the church published this document and it says this, and I have some questions about it, and it was just like, you couldn't really read it and like say like, oh, this is just pure anti-Mormon rhetoric. And if you are LDS and you're watching this, I'm not encouraging you to go and read it at all. And I'm not saying that you should, or that it's like it's safe to read if you want to continue to believe in Mormonism. I'm not saying any of that. If you like the way that story makes you feel and that your belief system makes you feel, don't read the CES letter. And as I read through it, I think I just felt betrayed a little bit and kind of lied to. Like, again, it was like, why is the church hiding these things? Like, I feel like they're not very upfront with the story, like the true story, the actual, like, the origin story, the history, and it feels like some of these things are being kind of pushed to the side, and like, it's like, don't talk about that, don't look at that. Like, even there's this painting that is hanging in a lot of the churches across the country, and it's this painting of Joseph Smith, like, holding the gold plates, and like it's like a painting of the translation process, I think is what it's called. It's like an artist's interpretation of the translation process. But this painting is like in a lot of churches, and it's just this image that looks a certain way. But if you read like the church historian resources that talk about like what the translation process actually looked like, it didn't look like this painting that is being put up in churches all over the world. And part of my education was to learn how to analyze propaganda and like the symbolism of art, and so I was like looking at this a little bit more critically, and I was like, why would they pay to reproduce this, to make prints of this painting and put them all over the place, and then like pretty intentionally leave out like what it actually looked like and what the experience was actually like. And it on its own, not a big deal, right? And the way that it like actually looked was that Joseph Smith had a hat, and he put the Urim and Thummim and like he would put stuff in the hat, and then he'd put his face in the hat, and then he'd like read out to the scribe, and he had multiple scribes during the translation process of the Book of Mormon. And that like obviously doesn't make for a good painting, to just do like a painting of two white guys in like a cabin, and one of them is like putting their face in a hat. Like, not a good painting. So I get it. Like, you're obviously going to want to make the painting be the cool, like holding the gold plates and like an angel in the corner of the room. Like, from an artistic standpoint, I understand. But it was like the fact that it's not a super accurate representation. And I feel like an organization that is so built upon like the truth and honesty and like, there's so much in the church's history that is difficult and is challenging to come to terms with, like the fact that Black people weren't allowed to have the priesthood or get married in the temple for certain periods of time. Like, there's a lot of issues that the church like doesn't hide because they can't really hide them. So it felt like I was like, why are they trying to hide or misrepresent certain things? And that was just one aspect of like something that I felt while reading the CES letter. And I remember sitting in the car in like the Costco parking lot, maybe like the day after reading the CES letter, because I think I read it like in bed at night, like with Leah. We read it together. And then I think it was the next day we went to Costco, and I was just sitting in the car, and I was just like, my mind was just racing. I was like, it was like too much. It really did feel kind of like the Wizard of Oz, of like you seeing the smoke and mirrors for what it was. And again, I'm not saying that it is smoke and mirrors. I'm not saying that what I believe now is correct. And if you are LDS or if you are Mormon and it brings you happiness and it helps you find a sense of direction and a sense of peace, and it just gives you that, like, the guidance to enjoy your life and live the way you want to live, stick with it. Because what it feels like to leave Mormonism is like starting over from ground zero. Completely wipe your memory, completely wipe everything, and set yourself in the middle of the ocean with a sailboat, and there's no land in sight. You have no idea where you're going. You're just like lost. You're dropped in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, good luck. That's what it feels like. Because Mormonism is the iron rod, right? It's like the one path that you just, as long as you hold on to this iron rod and you walk, you can close your eyes. It can be dark. It can be misty, whatever, right? You know where you're going. You just have to hold on to this iron rod, and eventually you'll get to the good place. And that's a very easy instruction to follow, and it doesn't require a lot of like deep questioning and challenges. It's just, they give you the storyline and you just follow it. And then to have that completely taken away is terrifying, and it's overwhelming, and it's scary, and like I do not recommend it. It was a huge part of what caused my mental breakdown. I just feel so like, what's the point? Why am I here? Like, all of these things that religion as a whole tries to answer, that like the why are we here? What's the point? Who am I supposed to be? Like, these are questions that are almost unanswerable by science, and like humans we kind of need that like story, this spirituality. Like, if you look at Pavlov's hierarchy of needs, right, you have like the basics, and then at the very top it's like spirituality, or like this sense of being connected to something bigger than yourself. You want to feel like you're part of a bigger story. It's crucial. It's essential for human experience and for human existence and for human fulfillment to feel like you're part of a bigger story. And that's the biggest story of them all. Mormonism. This is what happened before we got here. This is what's happening here. And this is exactly how you need to live your life in accordance with the story. And this is what's going to happen in the next part of the story. It gives you all of the answers you could possibly need. And it gives you this really solid foundation and anchor, and like all of these things to look around at, to orient yourself and to make your decisions. And if you take away all of that, you're just standing in the middle of nowhere, lost. And that's really what it feels like to leave Mormonism. It feels like you're lost. But it's also the most freeing thing that has ever happened to me. When I finally decided, I was like, maybe I don't believe this. I talked a little bit about how when I repented to my bishop, it felt like I had that weight kind of lifted off of my shoulders. It was like Jesus was there to share the weight with me. He was like, hey, this is a heavy burden. Let me take some of this off of you. When I left Mormonism, it was like there was no reason to even, there wasn't even a weight anymore. There was nothing to carry. Shame went away almost. Like, it almost in a sense removed the need for an atonement, because there was nothing to feel ashamed about. But again, I did feel very lost. Like, I've had to fully reconstruct my morals, my ethics, the story that I feel like I'm a part of. And just the emotional fallout of that decision and that process. Like I said, 80% plus of my thoughts as a homeschooled Mormon farm boy, that we moved to the farm heavily influenced by like my parents' belief system and the way that they viewed the world because of religion. Like my whole life was dictated by this thing, this storyline. And it was like, if Mormonism isn't true, what is? And even before I left the church, I always said, like, if any religion is true, Mormonism is the one. Because it does kind of like, it has been updated to a slightly more modern view, so it does fit with certain things. And like I said, I was constantly trying to like explain it and justify it and make it fit within the things that like we know because of science, or like the theories. Like I wanted to fit. And that was all gone. And then there was this process of like telling people that maybe this huge part of my identity was no longer relevant. And that discussion was really hard. But we're over an hour now. So maybe next episode I'll talk about the fallout of this decision and how I've like rebuilt a little bit. Maybe I'll get into the details a little bit about like what it felt like, what emotions and what feelings and what sensations kind of like met in the perfect moment to cause a mental breakdown at 25 years old. Like, and I meant to start this episode by saying welcome to another episode of a privileged white male complaining, because it does feel like the first 3 episodes, it felt like I was kind of just complaining, and that's not what I want to do with the show. I definitely want to process things, and I think I have a lot of things to process, and I do sometimes feel frustrated or angry, and I have emotions associated with my story, and that's totally normal, totally human. But I want this to be more productive than just like, I had to work on a farm, I had to do chores, my life is so hard as a white male. Like, I know I've got so much privilege. And the fact that I'm even able to have this conversation right now that I'm doing shows how much privilege I have. So that'll be all for today's episode. I just want to leave you with a few thoughts. Ponder maybe a little bit about what it would feel like if everything that you knew went away and you had to just kind of figure it out for yourself, what that feels like. And I want to leave you with something, with some sort of like an affirmation. So last week I mentioned that we got those archetype cards, and we also got this like affirmations one. It says affirmations, 50 affirmation cards to help you help yourself without the self-helpiness. And I've only read one of these, and it was pretty good, so I'm just going to draw a random one, and that'll be our affirmation for today. It'll be your Braden Moser in the morning affirmation. Here we go. That's a bonus card. I don't think I'm supposed to read that. So here we go. Now here we go. Here's the card. It says ups and downs. I need to flip this. I don't know if you guys can read this, if it's mirrored or backwards. I'll try to fix that by next stream. Hopefully the audio sounds better too. I played with the levels. Anyways, ups and downs. I see life as an incredible ride, and I'm lucky to be on it. Yes, the ups and downs make me want to puke sometimes, but they're also what make things fun and interesting. And when you look back, even puking on yourself makes for a good story. Wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty deep. That's been a pretty core part of my philosophy, actually, as I've rebuilt. It's just that, like, the only thing that I know is that things are changing, and there's always ups and downs, and highs and lows, goods and bads, opposition in all things. But if we can maintain that perspective that it's just part of the story, and a story would be boring if it was all good. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you for watching if you're watching the recording. Thank you for sticking with me through some of this messiness as I continue to improve and find my voice and get better at telling an authentic story as much as possible. There's still so much more to come. I still have so much more I want to do with this show. And I try not to let that pressure throw me off. And I definitely felt like episode 3 on Friday, I was like just super anxious, very afraid. Felt a lot of pressure to like make it look like something that people would think was better. But this is just me. It's just Braden Moser, and it's 8:12 a.m. And hopefully I gave you something to make your day a little bit more interesting, a little bit better, something to think about. I love you. Thank you for being here. Have a lovely day. I will see you on Wednesday, 7 a.m.